and I want to say thank you to you all for attending this event on women, environment and sustainability with the UN Women UK. And I think it's an important event showcasing the role that faith communities have in protecting the environment, but also the role that women play in terms of the activism within environmental impact and addressing it, but also how they are also very affected by environmental change and everything. So, just as a way of introduction, as members of the human community, we are all aware of the loss and damage that we humans have caused to the climate and environment, and the detrimental impact of exploitation of land and damage to biodiversity and habitats that economic growth has led to. We have also seen the impact on populations. Extreme weather events such as droughts and sea level rise is having negative economic impacts, particularly on developing countries, where we have seen people experience economic but also non-economic losses and damage on their communities, infrastructure and the natural environment. For example, damage to crops due to droughts, homes or infrastructure due to flooding, and these impacts have led to harm to human health, poverty, hunger, disease, but also a loss of cultural heritage and traditions due to that people movement in response to climate change and impact. And as we mark World Environment Day, which was on Sunday, on June the 5th, it is clear that we need to act to protect and restore our planet as never before. Businesses, academics, politicians, faith communities and young people are answering the call and are recognising the need to work together so that we put in place plans for a global recovery in which no one is left behind. Faith communities recognise how environmental issues have profound implications for future generations and human well-being. Rather than the repercussions of environmental change simply being a theoretical issue, faith communities are seeing these concerns as survival issues for those living in many parts of the world. And faith communities focus on their congregations and where they come from, and they are very conscious of the inequities and inequality in the world and the need to address social injustice and inequality caused by climate change. For example, as a Sikh, I am very conscious of how Punjab has been affected by climate change, failure of the Green Revolution and the negative impact that this has had on the land of Punjab, but also the impact that it has had on fellow Sikhs. Migration to the west, increasing farmers' suicides due to debt and poor crops, and the gendered impact. Evident that which demonstrates that women face particular hardships due to environmental degradation. This includes women's unique experiences as environmental refugees or women suffering from food insecurity, all of which women in places like Africa and India experience and have to travel further to collect water or food, for example. What Punjab has shown me is that we cannot assume that environmental change impacts everyone similarly, or even that it impacts the marginalised in similar ways. We have to recognise the difference and how it does often serve to make women more vulnerable than men, but also that whilst they are suffering these vulnerabilities, women are spearheading the change. Women like Rachel Carson from America, Wangari Maathai from Kenya, and Sunita Narain from India, but also our two faith speakers for today, Dr. Husna Ahmad and Amandeep Kaur, who are spearheading and answering the call to protect the environment. Now, having given my little spiel, it is my honour today that we are hosting this discussion from a woman's perspective, and it is my immense pleasure and privilege to hand over to our chair, Baroness Verma, who is also the chair of UN Women UK. Now, by way of a brief introduction, Baroness Verma is the first Sikh woman in the House of Lords, also within Parliament in terms of South Asian woman. And she was a ministerial champion for tackling violence against women and girls overseas. Her role chairs the UN Women National Committee, and Baroness Verma was the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for International Development from 2015 to 2016. But most importantly, she is a woman who advocates and who gives voice to women's experiences. And that is the reason why she will be chairing our talk today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jagbir, for the introduction. I daren't sit on this chair because it spins round. So I've got my little throne over there. It's a great pleasure to be here from London. I came down a few minutes ago, and I will be going back to London to disrupt a few more meetings tomorrow, but that's what disruptors do. Our job is to actually disrupt what we don't see as right, and I'm really, really pleased to be able to introduce 4 phenomenal speakers today, because if we don't start reacting now, the future for future generations is incredibly bleak. I've had the privilege of serving in government, one as an energy minister, so I know from an energy perspective why certain fuels are not so good for the planet. And if we don't want migration in the masses, then we really do need to help developing nations develop. And I'm afraid the North countries have been rather poor at sharing their resources and sharing their wealth, ways of growing their economies with the South countries. And I'm afraid we've now got to the point where Ukraine war with Russia, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, tells us that if we don't get things right, our resilience and our dependency on others just grows. So we've got a duty to ourselves, but I hope individually we have a duty to each other. And that means that even those that are thousands of miles away, when I was the DFID minister, I must admit, going to some of the countries in the poorer parts of the world, Brazil, African countries, many countries across even Eastern Europe where poverty is still rife, what we found was the inequalities just grew. The people that were going to get wealthy just got wealthier. And the people that were going to be badly affected just got more badly affected. And so what do? We have this honest debate with ourselves, but let's not keep this honest debate to ourselves. The best thing for all of us to do is to go out there. I always say by the end of the evening, if you've got 4 people in your head or 2 people in your head that you'll share a message with, and ask them to share it with another 2, you get the drip feed that we need. Now, we're going to start with our first speaker, and our first speaker is Claire Barnett, who luckily is my Executive Director for UN Women UK. I could say lots and lots of great things about Claire, because having worked with her for nearly over 3.5 years, I found somebody who is so passionate about what we do for women and girls globally by the work we do here. She has driven UN Women in the direction of travel that is now hopefully, and I say this again, hopefully building partnerships. So we want to partner up with Birmingham University because we believe that by doing work with academics as well as faith leaders, we can start to bring a shift. It's not done by 1 or 2 individuals. All of us have to be disruptors. And I'm jolly well going to be a huge disruptor. I don't care. I'm going to grow older disgracefully. I'm 62. I don't care. Nobody is going to tell me what I can't do. And I'll tell you why, because all your lives you will be told this is the way to do things. Well, new thinking doesn't come if we all do it the same way all the time. Plenty of information out there tells you how to change things. So Claire Barnett is the Executive Director of UN Women UK. UN Women is the only global organisation working to make gender equality a reality. at truly every level of society, from the grassroots programmes to behavioural change to global governments. UN Women's mission is to ensure every woman, every girl has an equal right and access to safety, choice and a voice. Prior to joining UN Women, Claire helped to drive McKinsey's UK office on diversity and inclusion, including as an author, a co-author of The Power of Parity, examining the macroeconomic effect of accelerating gender equality on the UK GDP and beyond. She's worked with charities in areas from microfinance in Brazil to justice for survivors of violence in Uganda and access to social protection for UK youth. So I think we're ready.
Jack here, if we can move speakers around. There's technical support in the building, but I need to go and find them.
Right, Claire, we're
My apologies, if you can bear with us.
taking you out.
We'll bring our technicians soon.
Right.
We'll try and bring you into the space.
So ladies and gentlemen, shall we go on to the next speaker? Right, so then I'll introduce Professor Aleks Cavoski. Is that how I've said it right or wrong?
Correct, that's perfect.
Great. Who's the Professor of Environmental Law at the University of Birmingham and is the College Director of Global Engagement. Alexander's research interests are in the field of environmental law and EU law, including certain aspects of public international law. Her research agenda is interdisciplinary and explores the intersection. Why so many long words?
I know it's on my website.
My goodness. Right. Intersection of law and other disciplines, in particular politics, science, public health and language. You know, when you're a politician, you need short words. Yeah. Right. Professor, if I pass it over to you and you can explain the rest yourself.
Thank you very much. Keep it very simple. I'm Alex. I'm a lawyer by training. So a lot of my presentation will be about law. So what I was thinking today to speak to you about is that how we include gender perspective in climate laws, environmental pollution laws, and generally policies. I hate to say we don't really do a very good job. We're getting better, but we're actually not very good at that. So what I was thinking today is to, in a way, demonstrate that very often when we think about environmental pollution in general, we focus on the effects of environmental pollution, but not very often we think about women as a particular group, but we think in general. And this is one of the things that I want to address because this is very important. If there is an effect that environmental pollution is causing, then we actually have to think how we're going to translate that into law and how the law will respond to that and ensure that we're tackling that environmental pollution. Then I'm going to demonstrate to you how we are slightly improving but not doing a great job and including gender perspective when it comes to climate change. And I'm definitely using climate change as an example, not necessarily because it's a major environmental threat, but just to demonstrate to you that we only do that when there is really a global problem. But there's so many other environmental problems which are put aside, and we don't really recognize that women are badly affected. And then I'm just going to give some suggestions and open the floor for discussion. What can we do better when we're thinking about women, environment, and sustainability? So if I start with this, and I have to say that I'm very often doing the same thing when I teach. And actually, this is also self-reflection, what I do and what I can do better. So when I teach students about climate change law, this is one of the things that we do. We always go through this, that you already know. It's everywhere, it's in the news. We know what are the effects of climate change. And we somehow always think about the general effects of climate change. And you know all of this. There is no point in going through this in greater detail, but these are some general effects of climate change. We rarely reflect and say how that affects women, not necessarily only in developing countries, but also in developed countries, women are badly affected. And this is one of the things that we need to change. And I think myself as a teacher, I need to change that because I often get into that habit of just thinking about the general things without thinking how that affects particular groups. I think we are slightly better when we're thinking about particular types of environmental pollution. then we're getting slightly better because we have to, because the science is showing us that things are really, really different. So, and I'll give you two examples which I think are really very important. So when we speak about air pollution, I have to say that there is a slight change, that we are thinking about particular categories in the society which are more affected by air pollution than the others. And women are really featuring very highly on that agenda. So if you think about the indoor pollution, this is really one of the kind of very silent threats. We often forget about indoor pollution because we always think about the outdoor pollution, but actually indoor pollution is a huge killer, and women are badly affected because very often we spend more time in household than men. This is still the case, even with women who are quite successful. We do tend to be more in the house than men. And what happens then is that we are actually exposed to that indoor pollution, usually from cooking. Of course, it depends what you use as a fuel, but you have a lot of countries which are still using the solid fuel, such as wood, coal. Even if you're using gas, it's not ideal. There's still, emissions of particulate matters, and they're affecting women quite badly more than they're affecting men. And if you think about, if you compare how it affects women in countries where we use, for example, solid fuel as opposed to countries where we use the renewable energy, you could see the difference, how women are really, really badly affected and having environmental issues and health issues as a result of that. So I think with the air pollution, the picture is changing, but only because the science is more robust to show us how women are affected. So when it comes to the other example that I wanted to use is chemicals. I think chemicals are really good examples where you can see that women are really badly affected. So if you think about in some low and middle income countries, a lot of women and actually young girls are working in garment industry. They're working in poor environmental conditions, working conditions, and they are exposed to various chemicals in that process. So this is one of the areas where we have to be really careful and think about women and chemical pollution, which is really bad. The other example that I can give is mining. Think about the countries where we have the primary extraction of very precious metals. A good example is Congo. If you look at the data from Congo, you will see that in mining industry, young girls are really badly affected because they're essentially extracting those primary metals. So you can imagine what is the environmental pollution and then the health impact that those young girls are exposed from a very early age. Again, we're all surrounded by chemicals. Chemicals are everywhere. So if we think about, the chemicals that we use on a daily basis, the women are more affected than men because of their biological properties. And I'm not a doctor, so what I'm saying now I read from various studies, but if you look at various studies, they're actually showing that the women exposed to chemicals are really, their reproductive system is really badly affected, and then of course it has an effect on everything that really is important for women. And if you look at the medical studies, you can see that there are histological changes to ovarian tissue when women are exposing to chemicals and so on and so forth. So you could see we don't really have to make a big case here. It is clear that women are really badly affected by various forms of environmental pollution. But what is very frustrating, that this is a well-known fact, but if you look at the policy and legal response, you actually see that gender perspective is not entirely there. And of course, the question that we have to ask ourselves is that why that's the case. So I wanted to use climate change as an example to take you through and to see why those gender perspectives are not equally included as we would expect, bearing in mind the effects that I just have mentioned. So if you look at the climate change, we have three big agreements, three legally binding agreements, from going back to 1992 until the last one in 2016. And if you think about the first one, you in a way are thinking, okay, this is a treaty that goes back to 1992. It's the famous United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And if you look at the text, and I did put some of the things here that we can discuss, you would see actually that there is almost nothing, not almost, there is nothing about the gender perspective in this particular convention. And I think if you go back and we're honest to ourselves, actually, I think this was expected back in 1992, because climate change wasn't really something that was on the table, it wasn't very visible. The countries were not really ready to think about the climate change and gender. What the countries were ready at the time were to think about this gap between developed and developing countries. And I think that's fine. If we think about 1992, I'm happy with what we are seeing here. And if you look at this, you would see that what we are seeing is that there is this, discourse, policy discourse and legal discourse, which is saying to us that developed countries need to take a lead because they cause most of the pollution, and they have to take an immediate action. On the other side, we can see that the treaty is speaking about the need to help developing countries. So we do have that really nice kind of policy discourse and legal discourse in this particular treaty. And for those of you who might have better understanding of climate change, we do have a very important concept which is called common but differentiated responsibilities when it comes to climate change, which means that we have to, in a way, make a distinction between developed and developing countries in terms of what they need to do, because that's just fair, because developed countries cause that pollution. But if you look at this closely, you don't really see any gender perspective. And there were quite a lot of criticism in general about this UN convention. Many lawyers call it an empty treaty. Why? Because the provisions are quite aspirational. So there is nothing really legally binding for states. If you say to a state, the states will strive to take an action, in a legal sense that doesn't mean really anything. But going back to 1992, it is understandable that we don't really have a gender perspective there. But it gets frustrating as we go further in time. So this is the next big thing when it comes to climate change. This is the Kyoto Protocol, which is a protocol which was in addition to this UN convention. And again, if you look at the Kyoto Protocol, again, there is nothing. There's nothing in the treaty, no language that would indicate that we have to think about the gender perspective. But on the other side, what was really important about any climate change negotiations is that the NGOs are really important. And we actually have representatives today from UN Women who were crucial in changing this policy discourse after the Kyoto Protocol. So it was thanks to the UN Women that discourse from Kyoto Protocol is slowly but gradually changing in the right direction. And what was really important is that due to the work of this NGO, we could see that things are slowly changing at the COP7, which was in 2001. For those of you who are not familiar with this, every year there is a conference of the parties where all the parties of the treaty come together and discuss what to do next. And we had one in Glasgow in the UK last year in November, and we'll speak about that in a second. So if we think about COP7, which is in 2001, and the Kyoto Protocol entered into force in 2005, but was signed in 1997, you could see that we're waiting for a very long time to see that gender perspective. Quite frustrating. You're waiting for 2001 to have that gender perspective. But again, I'm saying that gender perspective was only included because of the work of NGOs, not necessarily because the states were very keen to have that gender perspective. And that is the fact. So what we have is that we have two decisions. The first decision in 2001, which is finally recognizing that women are not represented in the bodies which are established under the treaty. So when you're discussing the climate change, there are no women to take active participation in that discussion. So that tells us a little bit about decision making, which is actually really problematic, because if you don't have various voices to hear. So what this first decision was prescribing is that there has to be a representation of women when it's being decided about the issues that fall under this Kyoto Protocol and the UN Convention on Climate Change. And then again, we can see in COP18, which was in 2012. So again, we had to wait 11 years for this decision to be slightly more beefed up. So it is frustrating that we have to wait for a decade for things to change. And then this decision is essentially saying that gender issues have to be a standing item when it comes to the climate change treaties. And this is a really important point. And also this decision is making a point about the need for women to take participation in decision-making when it comes to climate change. And we're going to talk about whether we're doing this and how we can do this better. There were two other initiatives that I just want to briefly mention because they were again due to the work of the UN Women. And this is the Lima Work Programme on Gender, which finally put this gender consideration as an item when it comes to climate change. And every few years we have an action plan which is thinking about how we can include women and how women can contribute. Reed Agreement is an interesting one, which is looking at how women can, not necessarily women, but everyone, but there is a gender perspective, and that's why I want to mention it, how we can, in a way, deal with deforestation and forest degradation, and how we can, in a way, manage forests in a better way. But what is really interesting about this agreement, which was negotiated so many times, was that this agreement actually recognized that women are much better placed to manage forests, that they use natural resources from forests in a better way, but they're not part of the management. And also one thing that Jagbir mentioned at the beginning, which is really frustrating, and this is when it comes to the ownership, women do not have land tenure in the same way as men. And this is not just something that is in developing countries. I won't go into the property issues in the UK and the extent to which women have the same rights. It's a separate issue. So it's nothing to do with the environment, it's about the property, but it's still frustrating. And then I think the game changer, to my mind, and I agree, were the sustainability goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, at least from the perspective of our students. I think this was a really very nice way to say, but we have to do something about gender equality. And there is a link between women, climate change, sustainability, and what we do and how we do. So I think this was a really very nice thing that I often discuss with students, how we can use each of those goals to improve the participation of women. Even if you go to, decent work and economic growth, you can see how women are really part of, for example, circular economy. And they are key in circular economy. So if you think about, I looked at some data, 80% of consumer decisions are made by women. So we make those choices which contribute to circular economy. So whatever of these goals you take, it will show you how women are really key to environmental decision making. And I'm not going to go into climate change and so on and so forth, but this just gives you an impression how these goals were really key in making sure that women are part of the decision making process. And then finally, this is the agreement from 2016. So the first one was in 1992, this is 2016, and it was only in this agreement that we for the first time actually have women mentioned in the legal act. So we waited really long, but we got it, so we have the women embedded into the discourse, the legal language there, and you can see that in the recital there is this issue of gender equality and empowering women and intergenerational equality, which is really important. But what is also important about the Paris Agreement, and I put a few other provisions, they may be quite important for you, that the women really play a key role when it comes to adaptation policies. Because we came to the point where we can mitigate emissions, but we may be too late. What we need to do now is to really have a robust adaptation policies. And this is where the women are really going to play a key role. And we can talk about what are the ways, but women are seen as having this role. And what is really important here is that we're speaking about something that Jagbir mentioned at the beginning, and this is the role of knowledge that women have when it comes to environmental pollution and when it comes to climate change. And this is the last thing in Paris Agreement, where again you can see that you know, there is this inclusive legal language which is just saying about, you know, capacity building and how women are part of that capacity building thing, effort. And this is one of the things that I found in UN Women, and I deliberately took this because I know you will be here, is that if you compare, there's fantastic graphics on your website which demonstrates actually how little we include word women in policy documents. And this was last year. There is a movement about youth. So if you look at the discourse, and I was in Glasgow back in November, so there is a movement when it comes to the word youth, which is great. So young people are included, they're seen as a part of it, but less so any other category. I mean, we also have older people, older women who are also badly affected, but for some reason you can see still that this is not really something that is happening in practice. There is a movement at the EU level. I think if you closely scrutinize the EU policy documents, they are a bit better in involving different sections of society. So one of the things is that if you read, for example, the presidency guidelines, and every 5 years when a new president of the European Commission takes office, he or she has to present what they want to do. What is their mandate? Well, what are the objectives? One of the things that was quite impressive about the new president of the European Commission, von der Leyen, was that she actually did mention the importance of the environment, and she did mention women, more in terms of gender equality, but still at least there was some improvement. And you can see in all of those documents, I won't take you through, interestingly, when it comes to chemical strategy, they are mentioning the effects of chemicals on particular sections of the society, including women. So at the EU level, we do see at least the policy discourse is different. Whether this is something in practice, we can talk about that. So what do I suggest? What I think we need to do, at least in my view, first of all, we have to really be careful how we formulate policy responses, because there is, first of all, we can't have one response that would fit everyone, so we have to be quite careful thinking about a tailored approach depending which country, which society, which group, and we have to think about that. So I have been working with some colleagues from our college from Life and Environmental Science, and they do fantastic work on indoor pollution. And one of the things that they're very concerned with is that this transition from solid fuels to renewable fuels, because there are some traditional practices in cooking which do involve solid fuel. So how do you make that tailored approach where you're not losing that cultural element for the sake of climate change objectives? So you need to reconcile all of that and have a tailored response. So this is something that they're doing really very well when it comes to indoor pollution. I think we also have to be quite careful, and Baroness can speak more about that we have to speak to several environmental objectives, economic objectives, so we have to reconcile all of that, and that's why we need women to participate. One of the things is, and I have mentioned this briefly, that I think women will play a key role in when it comes to adaptation. And I mentioned to you the example of circular economy, the importance that women carry in making those environmental consumer decisions, which are really important when it comes to eco products. And you usually think that's not the case, but actually when you look at the data, you get really much surprised by the importance. One of the things that it's not really happening, and this is strangely enough, both in developed and developing countries, that actually women do not participate when it comes to environmental decision making. They're not part of that process. At local level, national level, regional level, they're not. And I can't figure out, and this is one of the reasons, what's the reason for that? Why we don't get involved. Even at the local level, we don't get involved. And it's a big question why. Whether we don't have time, what is the reason why we don't get involved? I can't really answer that question myself. And one of the things that I think will boost the participation of women is that if we get more women in science. So I look at the data again for the UK. Only 27% of the workforce in STEM are accounted, and our women take 27% of the STEM workforce in the UK. That's actually really small. So that will be one of the ways of pushing that. And I think the final thing to say, and this is something that we're trying to do at the University of Birmingham, and the fact that you're all here, it's really important, is that we need to bring that through education. So we need to have that part of our education of understanding not just women, but there are other categories of the society which are badly affected. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. I think, oh, I can see a smile, so I'm hoping technology has, right. I want to thank you very much, Aleks, for that brilliant, brilliant presentation. It was really very informative, but key points that I've taken away, and I take them away whenever I go, when I hear brilliant speakers like yourself, is when you ask the question, why aren't women? Well, women aren't often there because there are so many more barriers to climb over to get into those roles of decision making. And what we've got to do is address those barriers, because we can get women into STEM, but from STEM, if they can't get into the jobs that help us decide on policies, we have a problem. And it's not about shifting men out of the way, to be quite frank, although they've had the tables for far too long. I think it is important that they realise a diverse table gives you a better insight into how to change things. And that is not just about gender. You know, the astonishing thing for me at UN Women as a minister was they don't collect any data at the UN after the age of 49 on women. So after 49, you suddenly are airbrushed out. Now, that's a worry because people are living longer. So what happens to those women, nobody can measure. So there's lots of things we can do. And I'm sure in the Q&A session, you're going to be, I could see people noting away. So be ready for the questions, Aleks. Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to hopefully have Claire back on.
It's a real honour today to be joining some speakers talking about some fascinating topics. And I'd like to say thanks to Alexandra for the very kind words as well. So in her opening, Baroness Verma talked about disruptors, and I'm hoping today to share with you some of the key facts about both how climate change is already affecting women and girls, and then also some of the ways in which I believe gender equality is our best possible hope and lever to achieve climate justice and halt climate change. And hopefully we'll also raise some questions today for you to be thinking about. If you do have any time later for discussion, you know, I'd love us to all give this some thought and think about how we can be both leaders in our own communities and disruptors as well. So, tech permitting, I'm going to share my screen and take you through a few slides. So, as Baroness Verma mentioned in the very kind introduction, I am the Executive Director of UN Women UK, and we are an organisation that people often say, I sort of feel that I should have heard of you, but I don't think I have. And I think the reason for that is because we are a small but mighty and very young organisation. So UN Women was created about 11 years ago, and that puts us about 50, 60 years younger than a lot of our peer entities in the UN. And I think that's really a testimony to the fact that the world is just waking up to the need for multilateral organisations working towards equality. And hopefully some of what I will share today about the links between gender and climate will help to illustrate why that's so important. So as you've heard, UN Women is an organisation that is truly global and the only one working at every level of society, from grassroots to government, to ensure every woman and girl worldwide has access to safety, choice and a voice. So freedom from every kind of sexual and gender-based violence, equal opportunities in work, economic independence and choice over their bodies, reproductive rights, and a voice, so full and fair representation in leadership, politics and society. And so how far have we come? Well, by different measures from the World Economic Forum and others, we are still over 100 years away from achieving gender equality, and there is much more work to be done. So in these fields of safety, choice and a voice, women and children are still 14 times more likely to die in a natural disaster. And that is due to a whole range of factors, from cultural and social factors, what women wear, the fact that they're more likely to be in the home and less likely to have mobility and be connected to a workplace. In the sphere of choice, the pandemic is likely to have pushed at least another 50 million women and girls into extreme poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day. And in terms of voice and representation in society, 15 million girls will never have the chance to read or write compared to 10 million boys. And critically, these issues are really interconnected. So when we talk about the impact that climate will have in worsening some of these issues, we know that when climate change happens and puts strain on communities, violence rises, girls are less likely to be in school, and women are less likely to be represented across social roles. And that also happens during times of conflict and economic crisis. So those C's of climate, COVID, crisis and conflict are really connected and exacerbate each other. And climate change is a human rights issue. It's not limited to the global south. And, we talk about the fact that we used to say when climate change starts to have human impact, this is what will happen. We're now having a conversation where we're saying we already are seeing that the most marginalized in society are being the most harshly affected. And if we look at even the global north, it's well documented in the developing economies, but in Japan in the 1995 earthquake, more women lost their lives because of the number of elderly single women living in poorly constructed housing that was heavily damaged. In Hurricane Katrina in the USA, most of the survivors trapped in New Orleans were Afro-American women with their children, which is the poorest demographic group in the country. And so this is neither an over there problem nor something that's happening in isolation. We're already seeing that socially entrenched inequalities are exacerbating how climate impacts different groups. And in the UK, the World Health Organization is predicting that without access to the right amount of healthy and nutritional food, obesity will continue to rise to over 3/4 of men and around 2/3 of women by 2030. And it's important that we recognize this also as an inequality that is already happening and not one that is still to come. So in the past 10 years, 87% of disasters have been climate related. And so really when we talk about global risk to human life, climate is a very central part of that. When we talk about climate justice, what we mean is uniting people to take action on the climate crisis through a human rights lens. So the question of how can we work together to create a better world for present and future generations. And just to touch on some of the environmental effects of climate change and how those are linked to gender and human rights impact. So to take some examples, we're looking at extreme weather, rising temperature, destruction of natural habitats, and of course that includes loss of forested areas, degradation of soil and more. We're talking about rising sea levels and changes to the air and oceans, including warming, acidification, loss of marine life, pollution in the air rising, and rising sea levels as well. And these are all closely linked to human impact. So if we break these down, we're looking at a lack of access to clean water, more likely to see deaths in natural disasters, spread of disease, destruction of homes and habitats, mass migration, the loss of land rights, and food poverty and hunger. And these are happening at a micro level and at a macro level. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how they're both connected very closely to gender, but also how we can use gender equality as a lever to change that. And importantly, climate change is happening now and to all of us. So as the Secretary General recently said, no country or community is immune. As is always the case, the poor and vulnerable are the first to suffer and the worst hit. So why does climate justice matter for women? Well, more than 8 out of 10 people displaced by climate change are women. As I've mentioned, they're 14 times more likely to die in a natural disaster. In 80% of water-deprived households, women and girls carry the burden of water collection. So when water and food runs out, they're traveling further, expending more calories, and are also the last to often eat and the last to get nutritional food. So women are both expending more energy collecting these assets for households and then less likely to be able to reap the benefits of the water and food that they're bringing in. Where women and girls are having to travel further to get that water and food, they are at higher danger of assault and attacks. And also a lack of access to water for cleaning really poses menstrual hygiene dangers for girls who are on their period. Oh. And women own less than 20% of the world's land. While women actually are a huge majority of those working the land at a micro level, they're much less likely to have ownership and jurisdiction over the land. And so even, if we look at adaptation and mitigation, it's not a level playing field. Again, those are most marginalized by society, including women and girls, are less likely to be able to adapt to and recover from its effects. And again, these factors are interconnected. So where we see communities struggling to access food and households experiencing food poverty, we also see increases in FGM and child marriage and girls being pulled out of education, which gives them even less of an opportunity to access those climate leadership roles. Women also receive only about 10% of the credit available to small farmers and less than 1% of total credit to agriculture. So when we're talking about investing in sustainable growth and sustainable farming, women are not receiving a fair portion of that investment by any means. And yet we feel that there is a reason for hope. Now, 67% of climate-related decision-making roles are held by men, and while there were small increases at COP26 compared to previous COPs, we felt that that change was very small. In 2019, less than 30% of the heads of delegations for global climate negotiations were women, and that's starting to creep up a percentage point or two each year, but it is still very low. And yet 13 million people in over 200 countries, young people, have taken part in over 89,000 climate action protests, and a majority of those have been young women. So there's a real interest there in women leading the charge to push for climate equality, climate justice, and climate action. And yet, if we're not giving them the tools and the access to be able to do that, we're not creating that level playing field. So Lisa Schipper, who is one of the co-authors of the latest IPCC report published in February, said, when you're excluded from the decision-making club, as most women are in most countries, then you can't make decisions about the resources you know you need. Now, we talked about the power of investing in women. Women typically reinvest over 90% of their income in their families and communities. So there's real potential there. But we also know that let me go back to that slide, that giving women equal access to natural resources and to funds has a huge impact. So if we give women access to natural resources, that can both increase yield and food security at the same time as reducing emissions. And creating an environment where women have equal access to agricultural resources can increase production on farms in developing countries by 20 to 30%. Currently, women play huge roles in farming, but very little decision-making power is given. So doing this could actually raise total agricultural production in developing countries by between 2.5 and 4%, which would reduce the number of hungry people in the world by between 12 and 17%, which is 100 to 150 million people. So the impact that we could make on communities and the number of hungry around the world would be enormous just by taking steps towards equality in farming, access to land, and climate leadership. And as we look at the risks that organisations will be taking into account in the coming years, half of the greatest global risks that we're looking at are climate related. And so really including women in that fight has a huge potential. But actually, even when we look at the non-climate related risks, so data fraud or theft, cyber attacks, water crises, global governance failure, and an asset bubble, a lot of these actually also see gender equality as a lever that has really worked as a solution. So during the COVID crisis, women-led countries have seen 6 times fewer deaths from the disease. And we know that putting women in leadership makes companies and states both more resilient and also better set up for the future. So when we talk about managing risk, having equality at that leadership level is a huge lever that we can pull to achieve that. And this applies whatever sector you're working in. So when we talk about ESG and companies' responsibility on an environmental and social and governance areas, the S, the social part of that, often receives significantly less investment. So if we can frame these risks between environmental and governance as not only fundamentally interconnected, but also really accelerated by gender, we think that there's an opportunity to create much bigger change. I chose this graphic from mainland Europe as a reminder to us that these issues, again, are not only something that is an over there issue. Interestingly, during the COVID pandemic, we saw emissions across Europe really fall. And there's a question here about, is this pandemic a warning sign, and is it an opportunity for us to take a moment to reset our activity? Certainly in the area of women's safety, we used the pandemic as an opportunity to run community workshops where we asked, what do we want our public spaces to look like when we return from national lockdown? And it's all too easy for us to go back to normal life, but we want to be asking ourselves questions as academics, as community members, as business leaders, and more. How can we take some of the learnings from the reduction in emissions during the pandemic into the post-pandemic world? Equally, we've seen more community sharing, more community mobilization and community action during the pandemic. And so some of what we've been doing in the lead up to COP26 and beyond has been saying, how can we preserve that social momentum into the post-pandemic world? And we think that 2022 is a real year for change. So it's over 10 years now of UN Women existing, and it's more than 25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action, which was really the first global blueprint on gender equality, where women came together at a global level and said, here is an action plan for change. And while we've seen progress since that point, we haven't seen enough. Yet we have used these global exits from lockdown as an opportunity to rethink how we live and how we interact. We're seeing public mobilization on climate like never before. In COP26 in November, while I think a lot of us agreed that the final statements didn't go far enough, the voices of the public in the streets, of youth activists, of indigenous groups, were heard more loudly than ever before. So back to that point on disruptors, we want to be asking ourselves, what can we do to bring these voices to the forefront? And in the follow-up to COP26, we've been asking, where are women's voices? Gender equality had one day at COP26, but it was shared with another theme. It was the only topic that had a shared day rather than its own space. And so at this year's COP and beyond, we really want to hear the voices of women, girls and marginalized people much more loudly. So we think we've got a moment for really unprecedented action in this area. And a lot of that action on a micro level is being driven by amazing women working in the climate space. So taking some examples from the programs that UN Women runs around the world, we have 3 examples here of absolutely amazing women in Fiji, Albania, and Guatemala who are leading this charge. So in Fiji, we've been working with local women to reconstruct markets and improve resilience of that local infrastructure after Cyclone Winston. In Albania, we've been building drip irrigation systems to manage farming through more extreme weather, which is certain to come. And in Guatemala, we've been training women to provide solar energy to their communities. So not only being able to benefit from that, it allows children to study later into the evening after dark, but it also means that women have that role as leaders and engineers in the community. And that's very important for all sorts of other gender equality, from economic to safety. So I'm going to pause and show you a video about a few of the ways in which UN Women is working around the world for change, to hopefully inspire us all in our organisations and our own walks of life to think a little bit about how we can create opportunity through smart ways to empower women in climate. So bear with me, I'm hoping that we're going to have more luck with the tech today and I'll be able to share this with you.
First started in Qinghai, a large, thinly populated province stretched high across the Tibetan plateau, which has seen an unprecedented jump in extreme weathers in recent years. This has wreaked havoc on rural women, who makes around 80% of the rural workforce. In Qinghai, we helped rural women plant different crops, become more disaster resilient, and have developed skills such as marketing and leadership.
One initiative under the project was encouraging women rice farmers to grow lotus flowers instead of rice, a more sustainable option on their rice field, which were prone to flooding. They also learned about the market business and they gained skills to build a strong brand for their products. After only 4 months, they have achieved financial success. The income from the lotus fields is 4 times higher than rice.
UN Women trained 6 women on how to install and maintain small solar systems and how to run a business in the renewable energy sector. We have allocated 600 solar lanterns and 500 fuel-efficient cooking stoves as seed capital for women to start their endeavor. Over 600 households, most of them women-headed, have migrated from kerosene lamps to the utilization of solar lighting options, which are cleaner and cheaper than the kerosene in Mozambique. We have also witnessed more girls doing their homework at night, and this is improving their schooling results. Environmentally, we have witnessed the reduction of about 121,000 tons of CO2 emissions in the last 6 months, which corresponds to the period of implementation of this pilot in Mozambique.
Our program has been pivotal in building rural women's leadership and helping them withstand the impact of COVID-19. Like many in her village, Yan Shengyan used to believe that participating in public affairs was a man's job. But after joining UN Women's program, she joined her village COVID-19 management team and became a community leader. The program has changed over 69,000 women and has increased agricultural cooperatives' annual per capita income by over 1,500.
Our livelihood models supporting poor, rural, and ethnic minority women directly benefits more than 2,000 people in different areas.
All right, and switching back to my presentation. Do that now.
Claire, mindful of time, we've got 2 more speakers.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious that I originally had 30 minutes, but I suspect that due to running late, we're actually going to need to condense that a little bit. So let me speed up. We're almost at the end. Now, one of the reasons that I shared that video was because I think we often all need a little bit of inspiration about other examples that are happening on the ground to inspire us too, to think about change in our own communities. And this is very much something that we see as UN Women's role as well. We are unique within the UN system in that part of our role is mobilizing local communities, supporting civil society, and supporting the global women's activist movement. So one of the things that we've been doing with our community, and I know that includes some of you in this room, throughout COP26, throughout the Commission on the Status of Women this year and beyond, has been building a collective vision for climate justice. And we would love for you in the room to be a part of this. As you can see from some of the examples here, we've had all sorts of events, both in person and virtual, where we've been building this vision together. We've really pulled out a few things that are going to become the cornerstones and the questions for our joint vision for climate justice. And just to give you a few of these as thought starters for your conversations in your discussion section today, in networking afterwards and beyond, some of these questions have been: how can we build partnerships across sectors, not leaving this to civil society organisations and NGOs, but really working together? And I think that the partnership we've talked about between universities, UN Women and others can be a great example of that, but we're really keen to hear thoughts from you about how those partnerships can work across the UK and beyond. One of our key takeaways was we don't feel that women and girls need encouragement, they need to be listened to. There are plenty of ideas in the community already, and it's about lifting up those voices. We need to be giving women and girls equal access to the skills and the opportunity to lead their community's efforts. We asked ourselves, how do we incentivize organizations and states to go beyond individual level change and really think about systemic change? Linked to that, we've said, how can we work together to achieve the change in social norms needed to allow women to take up their just role in the climate movement? And finally, we've talked about spreading the hope and passion that's in this growing community to inspire others to join in speaking truth to power. So what needs to happen next? Well, we have 3 thoughts. We don't want to let the momentum of this year slip away. We want to build partnerships for change, and we want to empower the most at risk to lead discussions. So in the words of Wangari Maathai, the great climate leader, we owe it to ourselves and to the next generation to conserve the environment so that we can bequeath our children a sustainable world that benefits all. And some examples of how we can do this at UN Women being part of the change. Through our work, we know that £25 can provide access to solar lanterns for an adolescent girl to continue her education after dark. £220 can buy a group of rural women climate smart farming machinery, and £370 could pay a woman to run a solar kiosk and start a profitable business, helping her community be more fuel efficient. So what we are trying to do as a community is something called the Climate Justice Challenge. Together, using various sustainable means, so walking, cycling, swimming, running, sailing and more, we are going to travel the whole circumference of the earth. We'll each take a small portion of it, and we're doing that to raise funds that will go directly into the hands of these women climate leaders and enable them to be that hope for the future and lift up their community. So this is an invitation to all of you in the room today. If you would like to join in the Climate Justice Challenge, join forums of like-minded individuals working for climate justice and help raise funds to empower those women, we would love to have you. So please do check out, I'm sure you'll get a copy of this, but this QR code and the link below will help you to register, and you'll hear from the wonderful Atonte on the team who will help bring you into this community of climate leaders. So as Baroness Verma said at the start, if you do one thing today, please spread the word. We know that all of us combined in the room have an incredible network, and we all have the power to tell one person to do something and they tell one other person, and that is really how we start a movement. So please do share what you hear from all the speakers today about the links between human rights and climate change, and think about how we can be leaders in our own communities. And we really look forward to you joining the UN Women community with us. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Claire. Now you know why she's a brilliant Executive Director of UN Women UK. So I think we should swiftly move on to our next speaker, who's Amandeep Kaur Mann. She's the co-founder of Eco-Sikh UK, has a background in international business and environmental management. She represents the organisation as a co-commissioner on the Yorkshire Humber Climate Commission and is co-chair of the Communities and Engagement Panel. At COP26 in Glasgow, she was part of the interfaith panel discussion, bringing faith together for carbon neutral cities, hosted by Faith for the Climate. I could go on, but I won't, because the bios are longer than they're speaking. So what I'll do is I'll put it into your safe hands, Amandeep, and I'm sure that when it comes to Q&A, we'll be able to pick up some of the other stuff that you've done.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Is that okay? And thank you to the university for inviting me here today. It's an absolute honour to be here in great company. The speakers so far have been amazing. And with my presentation today, I'm going to use a few images to illustrate what I'm talking about, but also my personal experiences will come into this quite heavily, rather than kind of the statistics and facts based. So this slide here just shows what Eco-Sikh UK is about. I'll talk a little bit about how I started it, but the organisation itself focuses on the Sikh teachings. The Sikh principles underpin everything that we do, and it's all about recognising the link between nature, the sacred scriptures for the Sikh faith, and how we can put it in practical application. And this line and the prayer is one of the fundamentals, really. It says, Bhavan Guru Pani Pita Mata Tart Mahat. And that is essentially that air is our guru, water is our father, earth is our mother. And if we understand that, then really there shouldn't be all the issues that are going on today. So I was brought up, I'm born in the UK, I've got Punjabi parents that migrated here, and these are the teachings that I grew up with. We prayed 3 times a day, morning, evening and bedtime, and these were the fundamentals that always came up in conversations. That oneness, prosperity for all, recognising the human race as one. And these are the principles that led me to think that what I want to do for a career has to reflect what I believe. So, being from a family of migrants, they had different ideas. They wanted me to do something that was very safe. So they didn't want me to be knee-high in gooey water testing, pollution levels in the water for Environment Agency, for example. They thought that a better job for me would be something like law, medicine, dentistry. They were a bit too hard. So I went to international business. And when I studied international business, I really wanted this to play into it. So it was during my internship that I came across socially responsible investment. I thought I wanted to be a hotshot wealth advisor in the financial sector. And I realised then that there were multi-millionaires out there that only want their funds to be invested into businesses that do good. And socially responsible investment really planted a seed in my mind during my internship at Morgan Stanley that I want to do something that in business that does good. So then I upgraded my skills, and this is something that Eco-Sikh UK really want to emphasise, that a career change is possible. And so many transferable skills are out there, and if you find the courses that can upgrade your skills to do something that you want to do, it's simply a matter of knowing people. I didn't have the role models. In my life, there wasn't anybody doing anything like this, so I didn't know what to do, how to get there. But eventually I found my way, because where there's a passion, there is a way. I didn't know what careers were, but when I found them, I definitely wanted to pursue them. And for people of faith, this faith thing comes up quite often. So I was at the Liverpool Vet School recently. I was asked to speak there to talk about why there aren't many people from my background and other ethnic minorities doing vet sciences. And we talked about the challenges of migrant communities and how what our parents wanted for us don't always tie in with what we wanted to do. But the misconceptions around green jobs and green careers, that there's not that much money in it, there might not be knowledge of what types of opportunities there are and progression. So it's all about getting those conversations open. And the question that was put out there was, at this vet school talk with the 4th year students, how many people are here of faith and how many are of none? And that felt really strange to me, because even though I am from the Sikh faith, I can relate so much to people who aren't of faith, whatever that means. But the like-mindedness of people coming together really is what makes things happen, especially in the environmental community. And my parents, coming from a rural background, instilled in me the values of not wasting. So if I was chopping up vegetables at home, I would have to get this close to the edge of the okra. And if I left a little bit more, I'd be in trouble, because that's wasting food. And that's because they did the job. They were farmers. My parents came from a farming background. So they really knew the value of a grain of rice. I, to this day, can't leave a grain of rice on a plate, because my mum would be like, well, that's got a life. That started somewhere, that ended somewhere, has to end somewhere. So culturally, spiritually, religiously, there's a lot of factors playing into my choice into the career path that I'm in. And the references in the Sikh scriptures, a lot of them are using nature as a metaphor as to how we should behave. And living harmoniously with the world and nature is a really big thing. So when it rained and I complained to my parents, it would always be, no, somewhere plants or animals are needing this rain. We don't fight nature, it's all about harmony. So these kind of things really play a big part into your thinking. And so these are the kind of things that the scriptures refer to, how we should be more like nature. And so Eco-Sikh tries to promote the teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji to the Sikh community, and these are some of the outputs of what we've been doing. So in the top there you can see a litter pick that we did with Canal River Trust. We did, if you've ever been to a Gurdwara, Sikh place of worship, you get prasad, which is a sweet kind of pudding. So we were saying, how about we give prasad in the form of plants? why don't we do Butta Prashad? So we were giving people free plants, especially at the time of Vaisakhi, which is a Sikh, an important Sikh festival. And we were saying, you know, let's challenge the norms. And that's essentially what the organisation that I co-founded is about. It's about challenging how we do things and saying, how can we do things differently to tie in more with what we're really meant to be, you know, practicing. That in the corner there here, that was a really, really good event. There was a church and a gurdwara alongside each other for many, many years that didn't really, maybe didn't communicate as much as they could have. But the tree planting event that took place united the communities. And there are women there, as you can see, that were put at the forefront of it because, again, it's maintaining the forests and the plants that we put in. And women do play a really big part. The Green Flag Award that we contributed to for the Canal River Trust, that again was to get people and women to use the canal towpaths that are so often around our places of worship and inner city areas. And safety in numbers. So, you know, why not get a cycling club put in where women can feel safer doing more sporty activities together? So there are lifestyle changes that we try to encourage by getting people to be more active and outdoors. DEFRA has shown studies that people from ethnic minority communities don't have access to green spaces or are less likely to access them because of where they live. So I, growing up, didn't go to a forest. You know, my outings were theme parks or somewhere local, and the local parks, I didn't see the greenery as much as you would in a forest. I didn't get that deep immersion. But then you go to the Punjab on a family holiday and, you know, the rustic, the way of living and the stories that they come up with, it's just amazing how there's such a big disconnect with my generation and my parents' generation. And I really feel like it's not just a faith thing, it's a cultural thing. We should be passing down stories intergenerationally, where my grandmother had such a strong connection with the earth. She used to pick the cotton herself to then, you know, make it into quilts and things. She was bathing the animals. She was actually doing the farming. I was not encouraged to do any kind of planting or anything like that. And so I feel like the stories from previous generations, especially for the women to their daughters and mothers, it really needs to be passed down. There needs to be that motivation as to why they lived the way they did. And they were much healthier in some of their living. So just to go back to the setting up of Eco-Sikh UK. So when I took my environmental management career break to focus on the family, I wanted to connect my voluntary work with the local Gurdwara with my professional life. So I Googled just kind of eco and Sikh, and it came up with this organisation that are doing things in Washington and India. So I thought, why reinvent the wheel? I'll contact them and see if they need any help in the UK. They said they would like to set up and have some presence here. So with some of the like-minded people that they'd also connected with, we set it up, and that was about 3 years ago. And the idea really is to provide a platform for the Sikh community and other collaborations. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to set up new initiatives and projects. What we need to do is mobilize the community into taking part in what's already going on. So if there's a local litter pick, we should be getting involved. If there's a local Sikh community around, we should be getting involved. And women are quite often the drivers for that. And that's what we've noticed. They're going to be the people who decide what they're doing that weekend, what the family are doing, more involved in maybe the parent-teacher relationship at school. So we feel like there's a big opportunity there. We have been at COP26, and as much as being there was a real honour and it was good, we didn't feel like we got that much engagement from our own community when we said we're going to this. And I think the reason for that was that they didn't know what it was exactly. It wasn't talked about in my community very much at all. Even in my very close circle where I was going to be and speaking, and they said, oh, that's great, you know, it's great that you're doing that. But I don't think they understood. And I think if we'd have focused on the gender impact a little bit more, maybe that would have been a different way of reaching them, because the narrative on climate change has to change. Sikhs feel very passionate about social justice. So if you go to a Gurdwara and you have a pot of money that you're collecting for maybe an eye hospital versus a pot that you're collecting for a forest in Punjab or in the UK, you're going to get money going the eye hospital bit. But what people don't relate that to is that when these people's eyes get better, what are they going to? What is their environment going to be like? And so that link between social justice and climate justice, we're working on that. We're working on trying to weave it into other conversations. And as my part for my role in the Yorkshire Humber Climate Commission, that's, it's all about finding out which social media groups are talking about issues to do with gender inequality, and then weaving the climate conversation into that. It's not about starting afresh, it's starting a new conversation. There are things already going on. And I think as leaders or trying to be spearheads in certain areas, we need to find different ways. We need to change the narrative. I mentioned carbon neutral, net zero. I've seen people's eyes just glaze over. And those are the people that we need to engage. There are many that are already engaged, and that's great. I've done these kind of talks online with other organisations, and it's always the people that are already on board, which is great. But what we need are the people that are not on board, and that's where women have such a big role to play. COP26. So the Green Revolution, Dr. Jabi spoke about it briefly. It was amazing in Time magazine when they used this image of the ladies. So during the farmers' protests that took place in Punjab, the women were the ones that were either holding the fort back in the villages while their husbands were out protesting, or they were the ones that were also joining their husbands on the front line. And I feel like this is a really powerful image, and it's a reminder really of the values of the people. The fearlessness, the courage that it took to stand there. There were lots of things that happened to women during this time that were very disturbing. And the farmer widows from the suicides that are happening, they also have a story to tell. So what's happening to the land and the degradation wasn't really given as much attention as we thought it would have. So Eco-Sikh UK set up a seminar where we said, okay, you're seeing all these protests and you're seeing a lot of social injustice, but there is a link here. There is a link to climate injustice, and we feel like that's not being talked about. And so we started talking about the Green Revolution, and that this protest didn't just happen overnight. It's 30, 40, 50 years of the soil erosion, of fertilizers and pesticides ruining the land. It's about the land as much as it is about the people. And that's something that some people just weren't interested in. They only wanted to focus on the social injustice of these farmers, and that it pulled at their heartstrings to see their face. Talking about the conversation about the deeper issues as to why this is happening, why is the land suffering, it got a bit of a poor response rate. So that's something we need to work on. Farmer suicides are a very, very sad subject. And the farmer widows, this particular video was really, really sad. If you see it on YouTube, do have a quick look, because this person that committed suicide, his wife was telling us that he not only committed suicide, but he also shot his 2 daughters because he didn't want the girls to be suffering from, nobody wants to marry them because their family's in debt. And that's really unfair. He left his son and his wife. So she said, I'm raising the son now. But the daughters were not considered. It was too much of a risk to leave them alive while the family was in debt. And that's all because of the farming practices being unsustainable. So that was very sad. There are women doing amazing things that we need to encourage more of. So Remet Riot at the bottom here, she's a filmmaker, and she made a film called Toxification. She was actually ahead of her time. This film was made a few years before the farmers' protest, and it was asking what is the real cost of the rice on your plate. And it was talking about pesticides and fertilizers and what they're doing to cancer rates in the water system in the country. Really amazing film. She was at our Eco-Sikh conference. We have a conference every year to try and invite people like her to talk to us about what they're doing in this field. Paula Preet, you may have seen her. She's a British Army medical officer, but the first South Asian woman to do a solo expedition to the South Pole. Because how can you care about something that you don't relate to or you don't connect to? So if I haven't even visited a forest, how can I care about the melting ice caps? There's a bit of a disconnect. So when you see people that look like you and people who have been on these kinds of expeditions, there's something that happens within the community where you think, oh, she looks like me, she's from a similar family to me, maybe I could do a similar thing. This little girl here is my daughter, Avani Komhan. She has this thing where she sees me doing these kind of things and wants to be part of it. And unless we enthuse our younger generation on this topic and teach them the good things that are going on, we can't expect them to be on board in future when they're teenagers, and we want them to know things. So things start at a very young age, and this is where, as a female, I've told her about what's going on. Children her age that have to miss school because they have to go collect water. Girls that are, attacked possibly at her age, and I think she needs to know. I think she needs to know these facts. So these are pictures from Sikh history that I feel are the big connection between what we do now and in the future and where we've come from and what values have been instilled in us. So at the top you see Mata Gujriji. She looked after her grandchildren in their final days, and she told them stories, and we need to revive that storytelling about all of the good things that are happening. We need to talk about the climate champions, all the women that are doing amazing things. Our children need to know that they also play a part in our world. At the bottom, there's Mata Kiwiji. She was doing the food service. So many women in our in the world are preparing all the food for the household. They need to be making sure that they're making the sustainable choices, and we need to be giving them help. We need to be giving them the resources to do that. In the middle is Mai Pago, fearless, courageous, and she is a symbol of hope, and we need to be using our voices to campaign and do advocacy work. And Mata Sahib Kaur on the end here, she was right up there. Equality is such a big thing for the Sikh faith. The whole notion of patriarchy, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji challenged that at the time in the 1500s. There wasn't much equality for women, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji, passed down to the 10 gurus, tried to make sure that women were always given an equal role. And at the time of the first ever baptism and initiation, Mata Sahib Kaur was there, and she added a patasa, a sweetness to the nectar. And she said that yes, you're creating this Khalsa identity to protect the vulnerable, to protect the weak, but there also needs to be a sweetness in there because we need that balance. Saint, soldier has to be together. And that's where I've put balance in. Arguments need to be balanced about this debate that we're going on today. Not all plastics are bad. Plastics have done an amazing job in medicine and science. We have to make sure that when we talk about things, as women especially, I find, we know our facts, and we have a balanced argument, and we know our information. So I will finish there because I know I'm really interested in the Q&A bit at the end, because as much as I'm talking today, I'm really interested in what's coming from you. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Fabulous. You could actually carry on listening, couldn't you, for a lot longer, but unfortunately, because time's against us, I'm now going to quickly pass on to Dr. Husna Ahmad OBE, who's the CEO of Global One 2015, which is a faith-based international NGO focused on women. She's got a PhD in International Environment Law from the School of Oriental and African Studies, which I know as SOAS, London University, and she's an Honorary Fellow of the Cadbury Centre for the Public Understanding of Religion in the Birmingham University. She was a former Group CEO of Faith Regen Foundation, which is a multi-faith UK charity, and there is lots more, but I won't go into it because I want to hear from you, Dr. Husna.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Baroness Verma, Jagbir, my beloved sister. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you. Can you all hear me at the back? Okay, fantastic. As women, we are the guardians of the earth. Our wombs bear the next generation. Our love, protection, empathy, and care is more profound than ever when we are facing a triple planetary crisis. The triple planetary crisis is climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste. These issues reinforce one another and endanger the future of our planet. Air pollution causes about 7 million premature deaths annually, ecosystem degradation affects the well-being of an estimated 3.2 billion people, and the climate crisis causes extreme weather events that result in economic losses measured in the trillions. Estimates predict that by 2050, environmental crises and climate change could displace as many as 200 million people annually, twice the current rate. Climate change is affecting every country, on every continent, but it's disproportionately affecting the Global South. The vulnerable and fragile states in the Global South are more at risk from the impacts of climate change due to their limited capacity to cope with existing climate variability and future change. For instance, it's estimated that by 2050, about 17% of Bangladesh will be immersed as sea levels rise, forcing 30 million people to move inland. Famine and starvation are facing Muslim communities in Somalia and Afghanistan. As the drought impacts continue in Somalia, an estimated 4.8 million people are experiencing severe food insecurity, while around 1.4 million children are likely to be acutely malnourished by the end of 2022. In Kenya, 2 million people face hunger due to climate change, and with rising temperatures, food production will be further devastated. In Nigeria, floods affected up to 1.8 million people in 2019. Only one Earth. That was the slogan for the first UN Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm in 1972. This put sustainable development on the global agenda and led to the establishment of the World Environment Day, which, we're celebrating today, actually. 50 years later, Sweden hosted Stockholm Plus 50 from 2nd to 3rd of June this year, and the World Environment Day 2 days ago. Whilst these international conferences are significant, we need to recognize that we cannot live in silos and must attempt to capture the intersectionality and diversity which has been missing in the past. Of course, we need the science and the political will, but without hearts and minds, without a strong moral compass, without addressing historical injustices and continuing inequity, we will not succeed. This evening, I'd like to talk about the role of Muslim women in the environmental sphere. I start by talking about the surah in the Quran, Surah Asr, which is the declining day. By time, indeed, mankind is in loss, except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and advised each other to truth and advised each other to patience. Time is what we're racing against right now. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, I am in this world like a rider who halts in the shade of a tree for a short time and after taking some rest, resumes his journey, leaving the tree behind. Ahmed Tirmidhi. So why are we in this crisis mode? Why? Because we've forgotten our position in the universe. We've forgotten that we are merely an insignificant speck in God's creation. Our arrogance, self-interest, greed, and desire have brought us to the position we're in today. The triple planetary crisis and a financial crisis imminently upon us, the COVID pandemic, which has brought the world to its knees. And yet, we still wish we can continue as normal. In 8 years from now, we're facing the climate catastrophe, and we also aim to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The responses to the current COVID-19 crisis have exposed the failures in how our world is currently dominated by overconsumption, mass deprivation, and environmental destruction. We as women globally need to acknowledge that the world has changed, and this is our moment to define our aspirations for a planet that we are proud of, where inequality and injustice are removed and we save the planet from a climate catastrophe. I know that my sisters of all faiths and none throughout the world have a vital role to play in the global stage. Their well-being is essential to the continued survival of humanity. Women invest around 90% of their income into their own households, including their children. This is 30 to 40% higher than men's investment in their own households. Women are also shown to be less risk-averse and more willing to change their habits. We need to guarantee their safety and security so they can flourish. Also, our brothers, fathers, husbands, and sons are often part of the problem. A constant battle that we face is between religious beliefs and values as opposed to culture and traditional values. We need to recognize that these are different. We're experiencing the ugly side of culture around the world due to COVID-19 and the displacement of communities through climate change. Women are facing increased domestic violence, early marriages, trafficking, and mental health issues. From a Muslim perspective, what are we seeing is that culture in many parts of the Muslim world, and even here, promotes patriarchy to an extent which is far removed from the teachings of Islam. So how do we shift the dial? Knowledge. By educating our women and faith communities about climate change and the environment, we'll be able to see a positive change. The idea that a good education opens the soul and brings one closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is central to Islam. Only those of his servants who are learned truly fear God. Quran 35:28. According to Imam al-Ghazali, knowledge exists potentially in the human soul, like the seed in the soil. By learning, the potential becomes actual. This illustrates the fundamentally transformative nature of education from an Islamic perspective. Do Muslim women have a role to play in the environmental sphere? Yes, they absolutely do. Tackling climate change is a duty upon all of us because it's become a reality. Like the COVID-19 pandemic, it's something which impacts the entire planet and all of humanity. But unlike COVID-19, climate change doesn't have a vaccine. Like other faiths, Islam has so many environmental principles and guidelines embedded in the Holy Quran and in the Sunnah, the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies on its wings, but they form communities like you. Nothing have we omitted from the book, and they all shall be gathered to their Lord in the end. Quran 6:38. This verse stresses the importance of the ecosystems that are in existence, as well as humanity. According to Islam, humans are the caretakers and stewards of God's earth and creation. In the Quran, he tells us, I'm going to place in the earth a Khalifa, stewards, Quran 2:30. Be like the honeybee. Anything it eats is clean, anything it drops is sweet, and the branch it sits upon doesn't break. Khalifa Rashidun Ali. This metaphor by Ali beautifully exemplifies what being a steward looks like in practice. This means leading a lifestyle that is in harmony with the planet and not against it, as is prescribed in Islam. Muslim environmentalists draw upon the Quran and Sunnah to generate environmental principles from them, thereby creating ecological interpretations of Islam and a set of Islamic environmental ethics. The principles of Tawheed, oneness of God, Khalifa, stewardship, Mizan, balance. Every detail of creation has been created to stand in perfect relationship to the other parts of creation. This principle indicates the interconnectedness of the ecosystems and maslaha, the public interest, caring for others. We have a duty to our neighbours. So I've shown you that it is our religious duty as Muslims to preserve, protect, and nurture our beautiful planet. But my sense is that the reality that we're living in, we're negligent in our duty. We only have one earth, one home, so we need to act now. It's critical that vulnerable communities in the global south have access to funding to implement climate mitigation and adaptation practices. Hence, it's crucial that we tackle the effects of climate change by implementing and integrating climate mitigation and adaptation at the national and local levels. We should be climate conscious in all that we do, taking heed to not harm our beautiful planet. All animals, not only human beings, are also vital parts of God's creation. But as a Muslim woman, it's not easy at all. As a British Bangladeshi Muslim woman, a mother of 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters, I'm very cognizant of the barriers that are facing our Muslim young women today in every aspect of their lives. Islamophobia is what we face in the UK on a daily basis, and this isn't exclusive to the UK. This is the lived reality of most Muslims. However, the barriers one faces in the global north are quite different from the global south. Awareness of faith and cultural sensitivities and accommodating them is rarely recognized as a positive intervention for empowering women. I want to share with you some findings which are still relevant today from a research piece that Global One commissioned in 2016 on the effects of statelessness on Syrian refugee women, which resulted in a report called More Than Half. This research analysed the impact of statelessness in several crucial areas of women's lives, including water, sanitation and hygiene, menstrual health, mental health and psychosocial support, and religious and cultural beliefs. It found that women suffer disproportionately from the negative effects of statelessness, being exposed to far worse conditions relating to their psychosocial and physical well-being, and increasing the risk and incidence of sexual and gender-based violence. We found that there was a lack of an intersectional understanding of these women's needs, as well as their Muslim identities. Not only are humanitarian efforts failing to address women as women, but they are also failing to tailor interventions towards the gendered and faith-specific needs of Muslim women. These two central identities of an individual, gender and faith, are not and should not be compromised, even in the most devastating of circumstances. So much has been taken away from the victims of these conflicts. We mustn't further rob them of their identity. When such identities are respected, not only do our humanitarian interventions become more relevant, they reassert the human dignity of those we help, humanizing the statistics we're so often desensitized to. If we turn now to the climate crisis, these findings are still relevant today. How do we ensure that women have dignity in the face of becoming a climate refugee? According to Dr. Jamal Sagir, climate change is the biggest threat to world security. With the climate crisis, we need to think about the scope and scale of human migration due to climate change and how it will test the limits of national and global governance, as well as international cooperation. So what needs to be done? We need to stop only using the Western lens to find solutions, as without diversity and inclusion, we will fail. Investment, investment, investment in health systems, education, green technology, and digital transition, social protection, economic inclusion, and decent jobs. I want now to speak a bit about my organisation, Global One, which is a Muslim women-led INGO, and how we're encouraging Muslim women to take a more active role. The empowerment of women and attainment of gender equality has been a crucial focus of the international development community for many years. Its diverse and far-reaching implications on many other aspects of the wider development sphere see it stands as a universal imperative to ending poverty worldwide. Women in the South struggle to access support and resources to pull themselves out of the vicious cycle of poverty. As Global One is a faith-based women's INGO, we're all too aware of the discrimination, barriers. Okay, I've almost finished actually, that's good. Barriers, obstacles that are put in the way of real progress towards gender equality and gender equity. With 84% of the world being adherents of faith, and with the majority of them being based in the South, it's imperative that policy considerations from a faith perspective are also promoted. We're trying to remove the barriers which are hindering the progress of women in the Global South through antenatal care, dignity kits, MHM, menstrual hygiene management training, fistula surgeries, and entrepreneurial opportunities such as Islamic farming. We are trying to provide the tools and the access to girls so they can engage with education, acquire skills, and be healthy to lead a full life. Our organisation works at 3 levels: policy, advocacy, and resources, such as toolkits, publications and research reports, and development interventions at the country level. We do this because we believe that impact needs to be captured and assessed. The toolkits are ways of promoting sustainable development by placing it in faith or cultural contexts which are more palatable for the beneficiaries who are from mainly conservative rural backgrounds. We believe the key to change is through outreach, respectful engagement, strong partnership, and religious literacy. So Global One is one of the founding members of Ummah for Earth. And I'm going to end here. Ummah for Earth is an alliance which was formed in recognition of the need for more Muslim voices, and youth in particular, to be represented in the global climate movement. And it's now made up of 12 organizations and 4 individual allies. So in conclusion, the impact of the pandemic has been and continues to be unimaginable. And that combined with the climate catastrophe we're facing now means we're unlikely to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals unless serious action is taken now. If we've learned one thing from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's that we are all in this together and we need solutions for all, not just the privileged few. I thank you.